History is full of turning points, moments when a single decision could have changed everything. During World War II, Japan seemed unstoppable in Asia and the Pacific. They captured territory after territory, challenged Western colonial powers, and forced the world to pay attention. But what if things had gone just a bit differently? What if Japan had managed to hold its early gains, avoid key defeats, and negotiate a peace that secured its empire? It wouldn't make the world unrecognizable, but it would certainly make it far more divided, more authoritarian in many regions, and much less democratic in Asia and the Pacific. Today, we're going to explore this fascinating scenario step by step. How could Japan have actually won? What regions would they have controlled? And what would daily life and global politics look like in this alternate timeline? Let's dive into a realistic, thought-provoking what if that might make you see our own history in a whole new light. So how could Japan have actually won the war? First, they would have needed to avoid provoking the United States too soon. The attack on Pearl Harbor woke a sleeping giant. What if they hadn't done that? Instead of striking Hawaii, they could have focused on Southeast Asia, consolidating resources from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. With rich oil fields and rubber plantations secured, Japan would have had the economic muscle to sustain a longer war. Next, imagine if the Battle of Midway in 1942 had gone Japan's way. What if they had sunk all American carriers and wiped out the Pacific Fleet completely? Hawaii could have fallen, followed by repeated raids on the U.S. West Coast. Could they have invaded California? Realistically, no. But imagine a negotiated peace. The U.S., facing huge casualties and threats to Hawaii and Alaska, might have chosen to focus on Europe and accept Japanese dominance in Asia. Furthermore, what if the Soviet Union fell under German and Japanese pressure? Japan could have advanced into Siberia, cutting off a massive potential threat from the north. One small change here, another there, and suddenly, a Japanese victory isn't as impossible as it sounds. But what exactly would the world look like if that happened? First, let's talk about Asia. China would have been completely dominated. Instead of Mao's revolution or the nationalist government, we'd see a vast territory broken into puppet states loyal to Tokyo. Chinese culture, gradually erased, replaced with forced Japanese language, Shinto practices, and imperial propaganda. Korea, already annexed since 1910 but now even more aggressively assimilated, Korean identity would be reduced to folklore as children learn Japanese and pledge allegiance to the emperor. The Philippines? Permanently occupied, with Manila transformed into a major military hub. Indonesia and Malaysia, stripped for resources. Oil, rubber, tin, all sent to Tokyo to fuel the imperial machine. Local resistance would be harshly crushed. And what about India? Japan might support Indian nationalist movements against the British, creating a friendly buffer zone or even a puppet Indian empire under Japanese influence. Australia? Northern Australia could become a defensive wall for the empire. Darwin and other northern ports would be militarized. Southern Australia might survive, but under constant threat and economic blockade. A Japanese-dominated Asia would be a continent of fear, surveillance, and cultural suppression. But what about the wider world? Now, let's cross the Pacific. With Hawaii in Japanese hands, the Pacific Ocean becomes an imperial lake. Japan would control key sea lanes, cutting off U.S. influence in Asia almost entirely. Alaska's Aleutian Islands could become stepping stones for further expansion. Would the Japanese actually occupy the U.S. mainland? The American industrial heartland was simply too powerful and too far. But imagine a tense peace, similar to the Cold War, but instead of the Soviets, the U.S. faces a powerful Pacific empire. California, Washington, and Oregon would become heavily militarized, preparing for possible future attacks. Massive coastal fortifications would line the entire West Coast. America's focus would turn inward. A society obsessed with defense, with civil liberties sacrificed for security. Imagine the Red Scare, but directed against Japanese sympathizers. And globally, U.S. influence in Asia would collapse. Countries like Thailand and Burma might drift permanently into the Japanese sphere. Even Latin American nations might hesitate to align fully with the U.S., seeing its weakness exposed. This new world map would be shocking. The Atlantic dominated by Western allies, and the Pacific completely controlled by Japan. A true two-world order. But what about Europe? If Japan secured Asia, Nazi Germany would be emboldened in Europe. Without U.S. focus on the Pacific, they might have had even more resources to throw at Britain and the Soviet Union. Imagine a scenario where Germany defeats the USSR and consolidates Europe, while Japan locks down Asia and the Pacific. Would they stay allies? History suggests a big no. Sooner or later, these two totalitarian giants would clash. Perhaps a new global war, a titanic struggle between Nazi Europe and Imperial Japan for final domination. Britain, if it survived, would be forced to focus purely on defending its islands and colonies, perhaps making uneasy truces. France, already weakened, might be permanently under German control. The Middle East could become a battleground between German and Japanese influence zones, with oil fields as the ultimate prize. We might have entered a never-ending series of global conflicts, each more brutal than the last. And what about the atomic bomb? Would nuclear weapons exist? The U.S. might still pursue them, possibly even faster under the threat of Japanese domination. But imagine if Japan, with access to Asian scientists and captured European expertise, also developed nuclear capabilities. A nuclear-armed Japan could change everything. Deterrence would enter the picture earlier, perhaps preventing further invasions, or escalating tensions into a catastrophic showdown. How about technology? Without American dominance, Hollywood would never rise as a global cultural powerhouse. Tokyo and Berlin might control global entertainment, pushing propaganda through films and radio. Japanese research would focus heavily on naval and aerial dominance. Perhaps we'd see faster advances in carrier-based aircraft and super battleships. Space exploration? Probably delayed. Resources would be poured into military buildup rather than peaceful exploration. Global consumer culture as we know it, fast food chains, jeans, rock music, might never become worldwide trends. Instead, we'd see a world driven by imperial aesthetics and strict hierarchies. Now, let's bring this down to the street level. If you were a farmer in China, your harvest would go to Tokyo first. Your children, taught loyalty to the emperor and forbidden to speak your native tongue at school. In the Philippines, cultural festivals would be replaced by parades honoring Japanese war heroes. Australians in the north would live under constant fear of invasion or bombardment. In the south, economic hardship from trade blockades. In Hawaii, surfers might share the waves with imperial naval patrols. Public life dominated by strict martial law and curfews. American families on the West Coast would keep emergency kits ready. School drills would involve preparing for Japanese air raids instead of earthquakes. Civil liberties? Mass surveillance. Propaganda posters everywhere. Underground resistance movements would be widespread, but extremely dangerous. Would you still enjoy the same global connections we take for granted? Likely not. International travel and trade would be strictly controlled, and cultural exchange minimal. A world where imperial loyalty trumps individual freedom. Terrifying to imagine, isn't it? And finally, how would this change global memory? World War II as we know it, the fight for democracy against fascism, would be rewritten as an inevitable triumph of the emperor. Japanese war crimes, such as the rape of Nanking or the exploitation of comfort women, might be erased from the official narrative, replaced by sanitized stories of heroic conquests. Western holidays like D-Day commemorations would not exist. Hiroshima and Nagasaki might never be bombed, or if they were, they'd become symbols of imperial martyrdom instead of peace. Young people from Bangkok to Seoul might grow up believing Japan liberated them from Western colonial powers, completely flipping the actual historical narrative. Civil rights movements? Delayed or crushed. Democracy would be viewed as a dangerous Western ideology. Global institutions like the UN might never form, or, if they did, they'd be dominated by authoritarian powers. The world would be deeply fragmented, with rigid imperial boundaries, constant low-level wars, and an endless cycle of authoritarian propaganda shaping every thought from birth to death. So, what do you think? Could Japan have truly won? Theoretically, yes, with very specific strategic decisions and a lot of luck. But the cost? A darker, more divided and fear-driven world. No global human rights movements, no massive rebuilding era, no cultural renaissance, driven by music, movies, and free thought. A world where freedom is a myth and the rising sun never sets. Would resistance eventually spark revolutions? Or would authoritarian control become too deeply rooted to shake off? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you enjoyed exploring this chilling alternate timeline, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow history lovers. Because questioning what if helps us appreciate the what is. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking those big questions.